Number 1, it happens when you stop accommodating their patterns and choose yourself. The avoidance feelings shift decisively at the precise moment when you stop accommodating their defended patterns and begin prioritizing your own well-being over maintaining their comfortable dynamic. Throughout the relationship, you have adapted extensively to their limitations, managing your emotional expression to avoid overwhelming them, suppressing your needs to prevent triggering their sense of being pressured, accepting their withdrawal without protest to accommodate their need for space, and remaining patient through cycles of distance and return without establishing consequences for their patterns. This accommodation allowed the avoidant to maintain whatever limited feelings they experienced toward you because your adaptation meant they could have a relationship on terms that served their defended comfort, without having to stretch beyond their limited capacity or face genuine consequences for their inadequate presence. The avoidance feelings existed within the context of your accommodation. They could sustain their limited investment as long as you continued doing the adaptive work that made the relationship function despite their defended limitations. The avoidance deactivation in response to your self-prioritization happens swiftly because the shift fundamentally changes the relational dynamic in ways that exceed the avoidance capacity or willingness to adapt. The avoidant who could sustain limited feelings when you accommodated their patterns cannot sustain those feelings when accommodation ends because their feelings were conditional on the dynamic remaining comfortable for them. When you stop making the relationship comfortable for them through your accommodation, when you require them to do adaptive work they have avoided by relying on your adaptation, when you establish that their minimal investment is no longer acceptable, the avoidance limited capacity becomes starkly visible. They cannot or will not do the work that continuing the relationship would now require. Rather than rising to meet your reasonable expectations, rather than attempting to accommodate your needs as you accommodated theirs, the avoidance feelings simply evaporate because those feelings existed only within the context of you serving their defended comfort. The deactivation reveals the conditional nature of the avoidance feelings in ways that are painful yet illuminating. You believed their feelings for you were based on your qualities, your person, your irreplaceable self, that they loved you for who you are. The swift deactivation when you stop accommodating reveals that their feelings were based on what you provided, how you functioned in their defended life, your willingness to sacrifice your needs to maintain their comfort. The moment you stopped providing those functions, the moment the dynamic shifted to require them to accommodate you rather than relying on your accommodation of them, their feelings dissolved because those feelings were never about you as a person, but rather were about the role you filled and the functions you served in their defended existence. How to react? The critical response to recognizing this pattern is to understand that the avoidance deactivation when you choose yourself reveals they loved your accommodation rather than loving you as a person. This recognition should reinforce your choice to prioritize yourself rather than causing you to resume accommodation in an attempt to restore their feelings. The temptation exists to interpret their deactivation as evidence that you should return to accommodating their patterns, that choosing yourself cost you their love and therefore was a mistake. Yet this interpretation inverts the actual lesson. Their swift deactivation when you stopped accommodating proves that their feelings were never based on genuine love for your authentic self, but rather were based on conditional appreciation for your willingness to sacrifice yourself for their defended comfort. The appropriate reaction involves continuing to choose yourself, despite and because of their deactivation. Their falling out of love when you prioritize your well-being demonstrates that continuing a relationship with them would require permanent sacrifice of your needs and your authentic self to maintain their feelings. Feelings that would evaporate the moment you stop sacrificing yourself. This is not love worth preserving or worth sacrificing yourself to maintain. Genuine love does not require one person perpetually accommodating the other without reciprocation. Genuine love does not dissolve the moment the accommodating person establishes that they also have needs requiring attention. Genuine love allows both parties to prioritize their well-being without fear that self-care will cost them the relationship. You should also recognize that the avoidance deactivation frees you from a relationship that could never meet your needs because it required your perpetual self-abandonment to function. As long as the avoidant maintained their limited feelings, you remained invested in hoping the relationship could work, in believing your accommodation would eventually be rewarded with their increased capacity or investment. Their deactivation, when you stopped accommodating, eliminates that hope by revealing definitively that increased capacity or investment will never materialize. The avoidant can only sustain feelings in a context where you sacrifice yourself, meaning any sustainable relationship with them would require permanent self-abandonment that would destroy your well-being. Most critically, do not resume accommodation in an attempt to restore their feelings. Their deactivation, when you prioritize yourself, should confirm that you made the correct choice, that continuing to prioritize yourself is essential, regardless of their response. If you return to accommodating their patterns because their deactivation frightens you, or because you interpret their falling out of love as evidence you should resume sacrifice, you will simply restore the dysfunctional dynamic temporarily until the next time you attempt to prioritize yourself, at which point their deactivation will occur again. The only sustainable path forward involves maintaining your choice to prioritize yourself, accepting that their feelings cannot survive in a context where you have needs and boundaries, and recognizing that the loss of feelings that required your self-abandonment to exist is ultimately a gift that frees you to find partnership where you can be authentically yourself while being genuinely loved. Number 2, the moment comes when they realize you truly see their defended patterns clearly. The avoidance feelings undergo a decisive shift when they recognize that you have developed accurate, clear perception of their defended patterns, that you understand their defensive structure well enough to name it and describe it, that you are no longer confused by their behavior or accepting their justifications for their limitations at face value. Throughout the relationship, the avoidant has relied on your confusion or your charitable interpretations of their patterns to maintain a comfortable position. When they withdrew, you interpreted their withdrawal as them needing space, rather than recognizing it as defended avoidance of intimacy. When they were emotionally unavailable, you characterized their unavailability as depth or complexity, rather than recognizing it as defended limitation. When they failed to meet your needs, you accepted their explanations about their struggles, rather than recognizing their patterns as choices that served their defended comfort. This confusion or charitable interpretation allowed the avoidant to maintain their feelings because your lack of clear seeing meant they did not have to face direct confrontation with their patterns, did not have to manage your accurate perception of their defended limitations, and could maintain the illusion that their patterns were not problematic or were at least understandable, rather than facing that their patterns represent dysfunction they choose to maintain. The moment of clear seeing typically arrives after you have invested sufficient time observing their patterns, educating yourself about avoidant attachment, and processing your experiences in therapy or through research, reaching a point where the fog lifts and you suddenly understand with clarity what you have been experiencing and what their patterns actually represent. You stop accepting their explanations at face value. You recognize their withdrawal as defended avoidance rather than as a legitimate need for space. You see their emotional unavailability as limitation rather than as mysterious depth. You understand their hot and cold behavior as a pattern that serves their defended comfort rather than as evidence of internal struggle between fear and love. You name their patterns accurately. You withdraw when intimacy increases. You deactivate when I express needs. You use distance to regulate your anxiety about closeness. Using language that describes their defensive structure rather than accepting their preferred characterizations of their behavior. The avoidant recognizes when you develop this clear perception through several signals. You stop being confused by their behavior and start predicting their patterns accurately. You respond to their defended moves with understanding of what is happening, rather than with the confusion or self-blame that previously characterized your responses. You name their patterns directly in conversations rather than accepting vague explanations. You demonstrate through your observations and your statements that you see beneath their defended presentation to the defensive structure operating underneath. This clear seeing disturbs the avoidant profoundly because it eliminates the comfortable dynamic where they could maintain their patterns while you remain confused about what was occurring or charitable in your interpretation of their behavior. The avoidance deactivation in response to being clearly seen operates through several mechanisms. First, being accurately perceived threatens the avoidant's defended self-concept and their carefully managed self-presentation. The avoidant maintains a narrative about themselves that their patterns are not problematic, that their need for space is a legitimate preference rather than defended avoidance, that their limitations are acceptable rather than representing dysfunction. Your clear seeing challenges this narrative by reflecting back to them an accurate assessment of their patterns as defended limitations rather than accepting their preferred characterization. The avoidant faces a choice between examining their patterns honestly in light of your clear perception or deactivating feelings for you to eliminate the discomfort your accurate seeing creates. Second, being clearly seen eliminates the avoidant's ability to use confusion or misunderstanding as an excuse for their patterns. When you are confused about their behavior, the avoidant could maintain that you simply did not understand them, that their patterns would make sense if you could see their perspective, that the problem was communication or misunderstanding rather than their defended limitations. Your clear seeing eliminates these excuses because you do understand their patterns accurately. You see their defensive structure clearly and can articulate it precisely. The avoidant can no longer hide behind claims of being misunderstood when you demonstrate you understand them accurately enough to predict and describe their patterns. Third, being clearly seen creates pressure for change that the avoidant resists through deactivation. When you see their patterns clearly and name them accurately, continued maintenance of those patterns becomes more difficult because you are no longer accommodating the patterns through confusion. The avoidant faces the prospect of either modifying their defended structure in response to your clear perception or facing ongoing confrontation with your accurate assessment of their limitations. Rather than changing or facing continued confrontation, the avoidance feelings deactivate as a defended response that eliminates the relationship and therefore eliminates the person whose clear seeing created uncomfortable pressure. How to react. The appropriate response to recognizing that the avoidant deactivated because you see them clearly is to maintain your clear perception rather than pretending not to see their patterns in an attempt to restore their feelings. The temptation exists to return to confusion or charitable interpretation, to stop naming their patterns accurately, to accept their explanations at face value again, essentially to unsee what you have seen in order to restore the comfortable dynamic where they could maintain feelings for you. Yet this temptation represents a trap that would require you to abandon your hard-won understanding and to return to confusion that allowed their patterns to continue harming you without accountability. You should recognize that the avoidance deactivation, when you see them clearly, reveals that their feelings could only exist in the context of your confusion or your charitable misinterpretation of their patterns. They could maintain feelings for you when you did not accurately perceive their defended limitations because your confusion allowed them to avoid facing their patterns. Once you developed clear perception, once you could name their defensive structure accurately, their feelings dissolved because those feelings required your not seeing to persist. This revelation should confirm that their feelings were never based on genuine, intimate knowing. Genuine love involves being seen accurately and being loved anyway, not requiring a partner to remain confused about your patterns to maintain feelings. The reaction should include a firm commitment to maintaining your clarity regardless of their response. Your clear seeing represents hard-won understanding that protects you from future harm, that allows you to make informed decisions, that prevents you from falling back into confusion that enabled their patterns. Do not sacrifice this clarity to restore feelings that could only exist when you did not see accurately. Your clear perception is a valuable gift to yourself that you should protect rather than abandoning in an attempt to restore a relationship with someone who can only maintain feelings when you remain confused about their defended limitations. You should also recognize that anyone who deactivates when you see them clearly is not capable of genuine intimate partnership. Intimacy requires being known accurately, being seen in full complexity, including limitations and patterns. Being loved while being truly perceived rather than only while being misperceived or while perception remains incomplete. The avoidant who can only maintain feelings when you do not see their patterns clearly is avoiding intimacy rather than building it, is requiring you to maintain incomplete or inaccurate perception rather than allowing themselves to be fully known. Most importantly, understand that their deactivation when you see them clearly is their loss rather than yours. You have developed the capacity to see accurately, to understand defensive patterns, to maintain clear perception even when that perception is uncomfortable. These capacities make you more capable of genuine intimacy rather than less, make you a better partner for someone who can tolerate being seen rather than a worse partner for anyone. The avoidance inability to maintain feelings when clearly perceived reveals their limitation rather than revealing your inadequacy. You became more capable of intimacy through developing clear perception. They revealed their incapacity for intimacy by deactivating when that perception penetrated their defended presentation. Number 3, they detach when you demonstrate genuine happiness without them. The avoidance feelings undergo rapid deactivation when they observe or recognize that you are genuinely happy, genuinely thriving, genuinely building a satisfying life without them or without their presence being central to your well-being. Throughout the relationship, the avoidant has relied on some level of your dependence on them, your orientation toward them, your life being somewhat diminished or incomplete without their presence, to maintain their sense of significance and therefore their limited investment in the relationship. Even during their withdrawal periods, even when they maintained defended distance, the avoidant could maintain their feelings partly because they believed they mattered to you substantially, that you needed them or were waiting for them, that your well-being depended to some degree on having access to them. This belief in their significance to you allowed the avoidant to maintain investment in the relationship because that investment served their need to feel important to someone, despite their defended limitations, preventing them from demonstrating through adequate behavior that they value that importance. The shift occurs when the avoidant recognizes that you are genuinely happy without them, not performing happiness to make them jealous or to manipulate their response, but authentically thriving in ways that demonstrate you have built a satisfying life that does not require their presence or their validation to feel complete. You post content showing genuine joy in activities that do not include them. You discuss plans and goals that reflect a rich, full life, not organized around their potential presence in it. You demonstrate through your energy and your presentation that you are doing well, that losing access to them or experiencing their withdrawal has not diminished your life, but rather may have created space for better things. You show no signs of waiting for them, no indication that your well-being depends on their return or their increased presence, no evidence that they occupy a central position in your awareness or your emotional life. This recognition of your genuine happiness without them triggers the avoidance deactivation through several mechanisms. First, your demonstrated happiness eliminates their significance in your life in ways that make maintaining investment in you less rewarding for their defended position. The avoidance sustained feelings partly because those feelings served their need to matter to someone, to be important in someone's life, despite their inadequate presence. When you demonstrate genuine happiness without them, you reveal that they are not as important to your well-being as they believed, that you do not need them in ways that would make them feel significant despite their defended limitations. The loss of significance makes maintaining feelings less rewarding because those feelings no longer serve the function of making them feel important to someone. Second, your happiness without them threatens the avoidance narrative about the relationship and about themselves. The avoidant maintain the belief that despite their patterns, despite their inadequate presence, they were valuable enough that losing them would create substantial suffering for you. Your demonstrated happiness contradicts this narrative by revealing that losing them or experiencing their inadequate presence did not create the suffering they imagined, that you are capable of thriving without them in ways that suggest they were not as essential to your well-being as they believed. This contradiction threatens the avoidant self-concept and makes maintaining investment in you uncomfortable because your thriving suggests they were not as valuable or as necessary as they needed to believe. Third, your happiness without them eliminates the power dynamic that the avoidant relied upon to maintain a comfortable, defended position. When you appeared to need them, when your well-being seemed to depend on their presence, when you oriented your life around hoping for their increased availability, the avoidant held power in the relationship through their capacity to provide or withhold their presence according to their defended comfort. Your demonstrated happiness without them eliminates this power by revealing that you do not need what they can provide, that your well-being does not depend on their choices about their availability, that they have lost the leverage that came from your dependence on them. The loss of this power makes the relationship less comfortable for the avoidance defended position and contributes to their deactivation. How to react. The critical response to recognizing that the avoidant deactivated because you demonstrated genuine happiness without them is to continue building your satisfying life, rather than dimming yourself or returning to dependence in an attempt to restore their feelings. The temptation exists to interpret their deactivation as evidence that you should appear to need them more, should demonstrate that your happiness depends on them, should return to orienting your life around their potential presence. Yet this temptation represents a profound trap that would require you to abandon your authentic well-being and to perform dependence to maintain feelings that could only exist when you appeared to need them. You should recognize that the avoidance deactivation when you demonstrate happiness without them reveals that their feelings required your unhappiness or your dependence to persist. They could maintain investment when you appeared to need them, when your life seemed incomplete without them, when you demonstrated through your state that they were essential to your well-being. Once you demonstrated genuine happiness without them, once you revealed through your thriving that you did not need them in ways that made them feel significant, their feelings dissolved because those feelings were based on your dependence rather than on genuine appreciation for your authentic self. This recognition should confirm that their feelings were never a healthy foundation for relationship. Healthy love celebrates a partner's happiness regardless of whether that happiness depends on the relationship. Healthy love wants a partner to thrive even when that thriving demonstrates independence rather than dependence. Healthy love does not require a partner to be unhappy or incomplete without you to maintain feelings for them. The avoidance deactivation when you demonstrated happiness reveals that their feelings were based on an unhealthy need for you to depend on them, rather than on genuine love that would celebrate your well-being regardless of whether your well-being depended on them. The appropriate reaction involves continuing to prioritize your genuine happiness and your authentic life building regardless of their response. Your happiness is valuable in itself, not as a tool to manipulate their feelings or their presence. Your thriving represents your success at building a satisfying life, represents your capacity to prioritize your well-being, represents your refusal to orient your existence around someone whose defended limitations prevented them from being an adequate partner. Do not abandon this success or dim your happiness to restore feelings that could only exist when you appeared to need them. You should also recognize that their deactivation when you demonstrate happiness frees you from a relationship that required your diminishment to function. As long as the avoidant maintained feelings while you appeared to need them, you faced pressure to maintain that appearance of need, to organize your life around their potential presence, to demonstrate through your state that they were essential to your well-being. Their deactivation, when you demonstrated independence, eliminates this pressure by ending a relationship that required your dependence, freeing you to continue building a satisfying, autonomous life without pressure to appear incomplete to maintain someone's interest. Most importantly, continue building your life and your happiness regardless of their deactivation. Their inability to maintain feelings when you demonstrate well-being reveals their limitation rather than revealing a problem with your happiness. You should not dim yourself, should not return to dependence, should not perform neediness to restore feelings from someone whose investment required your unhappiness or your incompleteness. Continue thriving, continue building, continue demonstrating through your life that you do not need someone whose feelings could only exist when you appear to need them. Your happiness and your independence are evidence of your health rather than evidence of your inadequacy as a partner. The right person will celebrate your thriving rather than deactivating when you demonstrate you are capable of happiness without them. Number 4, it occurs the instant you stop pursuing after their withdrawal. The avoidance feelings undergo a decisive shift the moment you stop pursuing them after their withdrawal. When you break the pattern where their distance generates your chase, and you instead allow their withdrawal to stand without pursuing reconnection. Throughout the relationship, a predictable dynamic has operated. The avoidant withdrawals, creating emotional or physical distance, becoming less available, retreating into a defended position, and you pursue, reaching out to restore connection, working to understand what caused their withdrawal, attempting to draw them back into engagement. This pursuit after their withdrawal served crucial functions for the avoidant's limited feelings. Your chase validated their importance despite their inadequate presence, confirmed they mattered enough that you could not allow distance to persist, and demonstrated they retained power to generate your activation through their withdrawal. The avoidance feelings existed partly in the context of this dynamic where their withdrawal reliably generated your pursuit, where they could retreat to defended comfort while knowing your pursuit would eventually draw them back, where they never had to experience genuine risk of permanent loss because your pattern taught them you would not allow their withdrawal to result in actual separation. Second, your ceased pursuit forces the avoidant to face that their withdrawal has real consequences rather than being a cost-free pattern they could engage in while relying on your pursuit to prevent permanent loss. When you pursued after their withdrawal, you essentially eliminated consequences of their pattern by ensuring withdrawal never resulted in actual separation. They could retreat to defended comfort, then rely on your pursuit to restore connection without having to take the vulnerable step of pursuing you themselves. When you stop pursuing, their withdrawal suddenly carries real stakes. If they want connection restored, they must pursue you themselves rather than relying on you to do that work. If they remain withdrawn, the distance persists and potentially deepens rather than being automatically resolved through your pursuit. The avoidant faces a choice between vulnerable pursuit or accepting genuine separation, and this choice exceeds their defended capacity or willingness. Third, your ceased pursuit shifts the power dynamic in ways that make the relationship less comfortable for the avoidant's defended position. When you pursued after their withdrawal, the avoidant held power through their capacity to generate your activation, to create your anxiety, to make you work for their attention. Your ceased pursuit eliminates this power by demonstrating that their withdrawal no longer generates your pursuit, that you are no longer organizing your behavior around their patterns, that they have lost the leverage that came from your reliable chase after their retreat. The loss of this power and the shift toward a more balanced dynamic where both parties would need to invest equitably makes the relationship less appealing to the avoidant's defended position. How to react. The essential response to recognizing that the avoidant deactivated when you stop pursuing is to maintain your disengagement rather than resuming pursuit in an attempt to restore their feelings or testing whether they will pursue you. The temptation exists to interpret their deactivation as evidence that you should have continued pursuing, that stopping the chase was a mistake that cost you their feelings. Yet this interpretation fundamentally misunderstands the situation. Their deactivation, when you stopped pursuing, reveals that their feelings were based on the chase dynamic rather than on genuine appreciation for you as a person. That they could only maintain investment when you were doing the pursuing work, while they remained comfortably pursued.